Crime in Washington, D.C. is down, way down, after Donald Trump took over. Should he take this show on the road? Welcome to Sharpening Arrows, where we train teens to think biblically about life and politics. I'm your host, Victor Jakes. Well, after talking about Dr. Dobson's legacy on Monday, we are back to the political topics. And remember, one of the goals of this podcast is to help teenagers and parents think through and discuss issues together. So I would encourage you to share the AirPods, put this on speaker, and even pause the podcast for some of those discussion questions. Now, we're actually going to look at an issue that we talked about last week. Last Monday, we had an episode on what actually lowers crime. Should we focus on root causes, or should we put more cops on the street and put criminals in jail? Now, the reason we were talking about that was Donald Trump was taking over running the D.C. Police Department. He believed in the latter. He believed in strong emphasis on law and order. He said that crime in D.C. was too high. There was crime affecting residents, members of Congress, congressional interns, media members. And Donald Trump proposed a test, an idea of what works and what doesn't. And we found out the results. So let's have our first pause point right there. What, if anything, have you heard about crime in Washington, D.C. since Donald Trump took over? Well, if you haven't heard anything, that's all right. I'm going to tell you what happened. This is from the New York Post. The District of Columbia has gone 12 days without a single murder following President Trump's federal takeover of D.C. police, a feat seen only one other time since the pandemic spike in bloody violence. The current streak of no killings is uncommon in the nation's capital, which has one of the highest murder rates among major U.S. cities. There have already been more than 100 homicides this year. Now, in March, D.C. went 16 days without a murder, which was the longest period in at least 6 years, an MPD spokesman told the Washington Post at the time. But a bloodless streak in the heat of summer is even more impressive because killings usually spike as more people spend more time mingling outside. Now, the last recorded murder in the U.S. Capitol was August 13th. That was 2 days after Trump announced the department would be federalized and the National Guard would be deployed on city streets. Some D.C. locals told the Post they felt the presence of agents helped keep would-be lawbreakers on their best behavior. Quote, with all these agents around, people are not going to be stupid and just go out there and commit crimes. So I think that's helped subside everything that's going on. End quote. That's from Dion, a barber in downtown D.C. Now, in a recent interview, Vice President J.D. Vance said crime in the city had dropped 35% in just 10 days. That is an overwhelming victory. Donald Trump said, we know how to stop crime. I know how to stop crime, and we're going to stop it. And it worked. It worked on the most visible stage in the entire world. Now, since we're talking about policy issues, we're thinking about policy issues, I want to kind of step back and explain how unusual this is to have a policy go into effect and then see such dramatic results in such a short period of time. And there's three reasons, and probably more, but three reasons I'm going to highlight about why we don't usually see this. One is often policy discussions feature a trade-off between a short-term gain and a long-term cost. Think about something like the minimum wage. The minimum wage goes up. Some places now it's $15, $20 an hour. And there's an immediate, obvious benefit to a worker who was making, say, $12 an hour, is now making $15 an hour. And the downside comes more in the long term as businesses cut hours, as they reduce hiring, as they go out of business, as they replace workers with automation. And so you can understand in that debate, there isn't going to be this clear-cut answer. Here's a second reason that we don't usually see results this quickly. Oftentimes, the policy issue will involve a long time frame. Now, think about an issue like global warming, which people have been worried about for decades. And before they were worried about global warming, they were worried about global cooling, but leave that aside. People who are saying we need to cut back carbon emissions are oftentimes talking about what the world will look like in 2100. And so even if their proposed policies go through, they aren't going to say, well, tomorrow everything will be better, right? They're talking in the terms of years and years and decades and decades. And sometimes in policy issues, there are simply many factors that affect the outcome. You see this a lot when looking at economic policy issues. There's a general consensus, certainly something that I believe, I think there's lots of evidence for this, that high taxes are bad for business. But then you go somewhere like California, which has both high taxes and a big economy. Does that show that high taxes aren't bad? Well, I would submit no, and we're not going to spend a lot of time here, but just to understand, there's a lot of factors that go into a big measurement like economic, um, like how much product a state is producing, the gross domestic product. And California has a lot of systemic advantages that outweigh, in my opinion, the high taxes it has that hurt business. It has established universities and industries, and those industries include some of the biggest in the world in Silicon Valley. It has incredible weather. People are not just units of economic activity. Sometimes people are willing to pay more to be able to enjoy the great outdoors and the California beaches. And that's not just an advantage for tourism or to draw residents. That huge coastline is important for trade. If you are shipping products in from Asia, California has a lot of ports. And those advantages can outweigh, for many businesses, the bad business climate that California has. So let's have a pause point here. Can you think of another hot button political issue that involves multiple factors? One that I would suggest is immigration. There's a lot of things that go into the issue of immigration, ranging from economic factors to cultural factors to what to do with people who have come here illegally, people who've come here illegally as children or have been here for a long time. There's a lot of things going on in that issue and in many issues. And so these are reasons that politics has so many disputes. Very rarely do you have an opportunity to do something that resembles a scientific experiment. You probably are familiar with the scientific method, the idea that you have a hypothesis, a thesis, and you do an experiment and you hold everything the same except for one variable. Maybe you've done a science project. Maybe you've done a science project on what's the best way to water a plant. You try water, obviously, you try orange juice, you try milk, you try Coca-Cola, and at the end of 2 weeks, you take a measurement and you say, well, I only changed one variable, and so water is better than Coca-Cola in helping plants grow. Now, this just doesn't happen very often in politics, and oftentimes you have to look at big picture trends over time. And that's why what happened in Washington, D.C. is so remarkable. You have the political version of a scientific experiment where Donald Trump changes one thing, we're going to enforce the law and put criminals in jail, and you see dramatic results. So we know that tough on crime policies work, and now Trump is talking about taking this show on the road. This is from Politico, which reports that Trump said he is looking to send in the National Guard to Chicago or New York, and seeking to extend the deployment of guardsmen elsewhere after amassing troops in Washington. Trump told reporters he's considering deploying guardsmen to Chicago after ordering troops into the nation's capital and to Los Angeles earlier this year, a move that the Trump administration is now being forced to defend in court. Quote, "We're going to make our cities very, very safe. Chicago is a mess," Trump said. "We'll straighten that one out next. That will probably be our next one after this, and it won't even be tough," end quote. The Washington Post reported recently that the Pentagon has for weeks been planning a military deployment to Chicago in response to what President Trump has been saying. And so that leads us to our question for today. Should Trump send the National Guard or federal troops into Chicago to reduce crime? Let's have a pause point right there. What do you think? Should Trump send in the National Guard or federal troops to reduce crime in Chicago? As you consider that, let me tell you about Mama Bear Prayers, a podcast for moms who are knee-deep in dishes and training their teens. Whether you are in the carpool lane or the coffee line, host Charity Rios wants to come alongside you and help you grow deeper in your relationship with Jesus. Raising teens is an adventure with ups and with downs. And if you combine that with the busyness of life, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and even isolated. As the mom of 4 very busy boys, Charity understands this and knows this firsthand, and it's why she created Mama Bear Prayers. She wants to support moms who are on the journey of raising kids, to come alongside you and encourage you and pray with you. God works through prayer, so check out Mama Bear Prayers today. Well, I hope you have given your opinion on whether Trump should send troops into Chicago. Not because I necessarily want you to agree with me, although, of course, everyone likes to be agreed with, but because I want you to test your opinion against the arguments for and against. And as always on this podcast, we're going to start with the arguments for what I consider to be the incorrect side. If you disagree with me, if you disagree with your parents, it's okay. This is the place to debate and to discuss and to really challenge these ideas and to find out, teens, what you believe. Because at the end of the day, what matters is what you believe. Your parents' ideas are not going to be yours. You have to come to an understanding and wrestle with the ideas out there. And remember, the most important thing is to think, is to use that incredible brain that God has given you and to think through issues, not just accept what someone is telling you. Even me. All right, so let's make the argument that Trump absolutely should send in the troops. The reason is obvious. Chicago is a mess and people are dying. This is a report from Monday. 6 dead, 27 hurt in Chicago weekend shootings, police say. The ages of the victims range from 5 to 48. That's from CBS Chicago. Wow. 6 dead in one weekend? Well, I don't know. Maybe it was just a bad weekend. Well, let's go to the last week from CBS. 2 killed, 23 hurt in Chicago weekend shootings, according to police. The week before that, at least 34 shot, 5 fatally in weekend gun violence across city, police say, according to ABC. The week before that, at least 19 shot, 2 fatally in weekend gun violence across the city, police say. That's also from ABC. So what we know is that shooting deaths in Chicago are a routine occurrence. And what qualifies as good news in Chicago? Well, this Memorial Day weekend, there was a positive sounding headline because, according to Chicago State Police, shooting Memorial Day weekend violence was down compared to a year ago. Oh, wow, that's great. Well, maybe there was only 1 or 2 shootings? No, actually, 24 people were shot, 3 fatally. And it's only good news in comparison to last year, when that Memorial Day weekend, 41 people were shot, 9 fatally. And as the Chicago Tribune reports, if you look at all of last year, 573 people were murdered in Chicago. So here's what we know. A Trump takeover would save lives. If you put cops on the street, law enforcement, National Guard, military personnel, you are going to reduce crime. We know it works because it just happened in Washington, D.C. The city has gone 12 days without a murder. Now, maybe murders don't disappear entirely in Chicago. It's a very big and populated city, but everyone knows that murder would go down, and saving human life is the most important thing. Think about the Great Eight. The Great Eight are those questions that we put in our mental toolbox to examine policy issues. What happens next? Well, if Trump sends in the troops, murders will go down. Question 2, has this been tried before? Yes, we've just spent the whole episode talking about how this has been tried in Washington, D.C., and it works. Question 6, is this an appeal to emotion or logic? This is an appeal to the most basic and obvious of logic. All right, let's have another pause point because I don't think Trump should send in the troops. So let's ask, which of the Great Eight apply against the argument that I've just made? And just for review, the Great Eight are this. Question 1, what happens next? Question 2, has this been tried before? Question 3, is there a principle involved? Question 4, what are the trade-offs? Question 5, what do you mean by that? Question 6, is this an appeal to emotion or logic? Question 7, am I focused on the speaker or the argument? Question 8, what does the Bible say? And remember, just because I don't choose the question that you did doesn't mean that your question was wrong. There are often multiple ways to attack an issue. All right, so let's make the case that Trump should not send in the troops. The first part of that case is acknowledging that the statistics that I just read are devastating, are tragic, and agreeing with the analysis that if Trump sent in the troops, there would be fewer murders in Chicago. I think that is true. But then we get to question 3. Is there a principle involved here? And there is, because Trump is not the king. He is the president, constrained by the U.S. Constitution. Now, that Constitution creates a special federal district that we know as Washington, D.C., where the federal government has special, unique authority. But states are to be run by governors and mayors, not the president. The president can't simply send in the troops anywhere across the country to do something that's supposed to be done by the governor or the mayor or elected officials. The president's power is limited by the Constitution. There's a concept known as federalism, very important concept, that says the federal government has certain responsibilities that only the federal government can do, but those other responsibilities should be left to the states, and the states should even leave things to the local government, because generally, if it can be solved at a local level, that's better. And there are many benefits to this, and one of the benefits is that people can see competing ideas tried in different areas. So while we are confident, I'm confident that more law enforcement would reduce crime in Chicago, other people may be just as confident that it wouldn't. And so what federalism allows us to do is to try things in different places on a small scale and then make judgments and learn from successes and failures. And there's another important factor here. We could talk about what are the trade-offs. Well, if you establish the principle that President Donald Trump can send in the troops to a blue city, well, you've established a principle that a Democrat president can send in the troops to a red state, and maybe he can force them to allow boys in the girls' bathroom, or some other policy that conservatives would they would strongly disagree with. Local law enforcement matters are just that they have to be controlled by the local jurisdiction. So let's have a pause point. And this is a tough question. Do you think it's right to abide by a principle even if it means that people will die? There are trade-offs in life. There are absolutely trade-offs in life. And again, that's one of the reasons we have to think about issues and not just accept what's on the surface, is because very often there are significant trade-offs. Now, I don't often do this because it's not about the policy, but I do think it's worth doing just a little bit of political analysis here. I'm not as convinced that Trump is actually going to move forward with a full-scale deployment of troops in some place like Chicago. What we're seeing here is that Trump is winning a major political battle because Democrats have generally very often been almost reflexively opposed to Trump. What Trump has shown in D.C. is that his approach lowers crime, and we know the public likes low crime. And the obvious play for Democrats would be to say, wow, great, we have a solution to high crime, we're going to copy it. But because they have this kind of reflexive opposition to Trump, very few Democrats are actually doing that. And so you're allowing, basically what Trump is doing is he's making a contrast to voters of, I'm reducing crime, Democrats support crime. Well, just politically speaking, that's a great issue for Trump and Republicans. And so if you look at somewhere like LA, when Trump sent in the troops after there was rioting in response to ICE operations, the troops actually went in a very limited capacity. They protected federal property and ICE agents, as the ICE agents were doing their job, both of which were allowed and were far less than what Trump is doing in Washington, D.C. But with Trump, you don't know. And we always have to keep question 7 in mind. Am I focused on the speaker or the argument? And especially if there is a politician that you generally support, it can be very easy to think, well, they support it, I should support it too. No, you can't do that. You have to keep engaged. You have to keep thinking about the policy and not just the person supporting the policy. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review and share it with your friends and Christian community. If you want to watch, we are on YouTube, youtube.com/@sharpening-arrows. Give us a subscribe. Stay sharp and give God the glory. I'll see you next time.